So we'll start with this first one. Comes out of Luke chapter 16, and it's called the parable of the shrewd manager. Jesus said to his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, what's this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what should I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors, and he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down real quick, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. So he told him, take your bill and make it 800. Entrez-vous?
Hi, sweetie.
The master, and this is weird, because instead of the master being all upset and angry, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted so shrewdly. Well, now basically that's the end of the parable. What remains for the next several verses is Luke's explanation, or at least Jesus' explanation, of what the parable means. And once I read through this, it will be crystal clear to you exactly what the parable's all about. It goes like this. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. What?
I don't get that either.
No.
But
I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much.
It sounds like you can take it with you.
Almost. Well, I'll explain that in a minute. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then as a post note to this, it says, the Pharisees who were listening to this and who loved money were sneering at Jesus.
Of course.
Well, this parable is actually rather difficult to interpret, and most people are pretty unfamiliar with it. But that shouldn't be any surprise, because you very rarely hear it in sermons because it's hard to translate. It is the story about a whole group of very unscrupulous fellas. About as bad, I guess, as you could find anywhere. First of all, the steward.
nobody brought donuts.
Yeah, there's some
here.
munchies over there. Go stuff your face.
Coffee
as much
in the
as you
back.
want. Coffee's in the back. The steward was an unscrupulous fellow. Now, he may have been a slave, but nevertheless, he was in charge of his master's entire estate. And he apparently had a long career of embezzlement when the master was absent. Well, the debtors, they're unscrupulous fellows as well. They owed rent. See, in those times, you didn't really pay rent in cash most of the time. You paid it in a portion of the produce that you grew or produced.
Company store.
Beg your pardon?
Company store.
Company store, that's right. The steward knew that he had lost his job. He was going to get fired. So, he comes up with what he thinks is a brilliant plot. He falsifies entries in the accounting books so that the debtors are debited with less than they actually owe. Now this not only makes the debtors grateful to the steward. Obviously, if I have 800 gallons of olive oil and only have to get booked for 400, I'm going to be very grateful to the steward. And at the same time, it puts the steward in the position of being able to blackmail the debtors if the chips are down and it comes down to it. So it's a real smart move on his part. The amazing thing is that the master turns out to be an unscrupulous fellow also. Because instead of being shocked at all this conniving and stealing and everything that's going on, he is impressed with the conniving, the shrewdness of the fellow's mind. Hi.
Back to normal.
Yes. And instead of condemning the steward, he praises the steward for being so shrewd. Well, there's a certain amount of difficulty in translating or interpreting this parable, and part of it is that in the scripture it lists not one, not two, but 4 object lessons, all that come out of this one parable. And we need to take each one of these object lessons separately, because if we try to do it all at once, we'll just get all confused, okay?
We already are, but that's okay.
The first object lesson comes out of verse 8. It says, the sons of this world are wiser in their generation than the sons of light. What? Light.
Light, oh, light.
Light.
The sons of this world are wiser in their generation than the sons of light. Well, here's what the experts say the meaning is behind this. If only, well, first of all, you have to understand that when he says sons of the world, he's referring to non-Christians. By sons of light, he's referring to the Christians. So, if only the Christian was as eager and ingenious in his attempts to gain goodness as the man of the world is in his attempts to gain money and material comforts, he'd be a much better man. If only people would give as much attention to the things that concern their souls as they do to the things that concern their business, they would be much better men. Christianity becomes real and effective only when we spend the kind of time and effort on it as our attempts to gain pleasure, sports, work on hobbies, acquire possessions, buy a new car. If we spent all of that energy and time and effort and money on the important things, we'd be much better persons for it.
Can I take this to the council?
I'll let that pass. Yes, you may, as far as I'm concerned.
All of us, Bruce, all of us.
Which scripture is that, Brian?
A little bit Gnostic here.
Now, don't start on Gnosticism already. I'm not ready for that this year yet.
Okay.
Although
Okay.
that is something we should study maybe sometime.
Well, we went through that one time. I was hoping it would be the last time we'd ever have to go through it.
I
But
feel that
we-
way about
We can
Revelation.
do it again.
Me too.
Lesson number 2, object lesson number 2 that comes out of this is in verse 9, where it says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. In other words, material possessions should be used to cement the friendships in which the real and permanent values of life can be found. And he's suggesting there are 2 ways to do this, and the first is done as it affects eternity. I'll try to explain it by reading this. The rabbis had a saying, the rich help the poor in this world, but the poor help the rich in the world to come. Ambrose commenting on you remember the story about the rich fool who built bigger and bigger barns to store his goods? Until he had barn after barn after barn full of wheat and grain while there were starving people all around. And the message was, you know, you can't take it with you, so why are you hoarding it up? Why aren't you giving it to the poor who are hungry? The bosoms of the poor, the houses of widows, the mouths of children are the barns that last forever. See, it was a Jewish belief that charity given to the poor would stand in your credit in the world to come. Okay? So a man's true wealth, well, it wouldn't consist in what he kept, but it consisted in what he gave away. So that's the basis behind that thought.
Well, is that good works?
Oh, yes.
I think it is.
We're trying to earn God's grace. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that.
However, this can also be done as it affects this world. In other words, a person can use their wealth, their money, their possessions selfishly. Or a person can use their possessions and wealth to make life easier for other people, for their friends, as well as for themselves. We know that possessions in themselves, even really fast little BMW cars,
Well, I'm so glad he looked at you.
are not,
Usually he looks at Pat.
they are not a sin. Possession of things are not a sin. But possessions are a big responsibility.
Oil changes.
A couple of quick examples. A scholar, forever grateful to a wealthy man who gave generously to a scholarship fund. Example, a man grateful to a better off friend who helped him survive a bad time after losing his job. Examples of using what you have to help others. Lesson 3 comes out of verses 10 and 11. No servant can serve two masters. Either will hate the one, love the other, or will be devoted to one, despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. The way a person fulfills a small task is the best proof of their fitness to be entrusted with a bigger task, a bigger responsibility. Now, before you say anything, Don, let me get through with this comment. A person is not advanced to higher office until proof is given of honesty and ability in the lesser office. True of everything but politics. I know he's going to say that. So I'll say it for
Or
you.
something similar.
He's right.
I mean, you know, we have what we call the Peter principle, you know, where
Yeah.
everybody rises to their level of incompetency and all the rest of that stuff. However, Jesus is extending this principle to eternity. And what he says is, on earth, you are in charge of things that are not really yours. You can't take them with you when you die. You're just a steward over those things while you're alive. On the other hand, in heaven, you will receive what is eternally yours. But that depends on how you handle things on earth.
That comes close to earning.
I know it does.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, you know, if I'm selfish with everything I have and don't ever do anything to help people, you know, I may end up in trouble. And then there's a fourth object lesson that comes out of this, and it comes from verse 13. No servant can serve, or what did I say, 13? I misread that.
I thought you said 10 and 11.
10 and 11, yeah.
10 and 11, that was right. 13 is where no servant can serve two masters, hate the one or love the other. The rule that no slave can serve two masters in this parable was very much the truth in that time. A person who was a slave or a servant in that time was 100% totally possessed by the master. The master possessed that person exclusively. They had no time to themselves. They had nothing to themselves. Every minute of their life was owed to the master. Now today, you can look around and find servants or workers or whatever. A lot of them have two jobs at once. They're working for two different people. You know, we don't think anything much about it. Now the slave in Jesus' time had no spare time to themselves. Every minute of the day, every bit of energy they had belonged to the owner and master. What's the meaning? Serving God cannot be a part-time or spare job. Once you choose to serve God, every moment of your life and all of your energy belongs to God and Him alone. What it boils down to, it's an all or nothing deal.
But I think it's your energy in how you relate to other people. It's been monetary through this whole thing, but I think there's more to it than that. I think they're talking about you have to give of yourself if you're going to try to be a disciple of Christ. You have to give to other people. It doesn't mean you have to give them money or something. Time, compassion, caring.
Well, sure, because there are a lot of people who are very poor and have very little and still give enormous service to other people.
Right.
Even though they have nothing to give in the way of material possessions. But they give their time, they give their care, they give their compassion, their talent, whatever it is that they're able to extend. Their prayers. So I hope that helps to at least clarify a couple points regarding that particular parable. Now the next parable kind of continues on with the same idea. We're talking here about how you should live your life with these parables. And it's a parable that everybody knows, everybody's heard 10,000 times. And it's the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law.
Brian, give where you're reading from.
Oh, I'm sorry, Luke
Judy likes
10:25.
In Luke?
Luke 10:25.
Thank you.
On one occasion, an expert in the law, everybody knows what an expert is?
Somebody from out of town.
What was that?
Oh, what did you say?
Small squirt under pressure.
I did not know that.
That's
No.
an expert.
Never heard that before.
Never heard.
Oh, I have.
On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus answered. Do this and you will live. But the expert in the law, wanting to justify himself, asks Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus tells the Samaritan parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he fell into the hands of robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A temple priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any additional expense you may have had. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hand of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Well, I think we went through this parable one time, but I'll go back through it again because it's important to understand the setting and it's important to understand the people that are, the characters that are in the parable. First of all, let's look at the scene and the setting we find. We're on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. First of all, it's a notoriously dangerous road. It starts in Jerusalem at 2,300 feet in elevation, and it ends up 1,300 feet below sea level in Jericho. We're talking about a drop of 3,600 feet on a 20-mile road.
And there's no vegetation at all.
And there's
on
no
those hills.
vegetation.
Absolutely barren.
It is narrow, rocky, steep, has sudden twists and turns, and it was the happy hunting ground for thieves and muggers. Believe it or not, the Jericho Road remained notorious for many centuries after Christ. In the 5th century, it continued to be called the Bloody Way. In the 19th century, it was still necessary to pay the local sheiks safety money for protection before you could travel on the Jericho Road. In the 1930s, people were warned to get off the road before dark because cars were being stopped and robbed.
Was it like that when you were there? Were you afraid to walk it?
Well, we didn't. We were on a bus, a tour bus the whole
Okay.
time. So.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Jericho Road has been notorious for a long time. It was bad in Jesus' time and was still bad up until recently, at least. Now, let's look at the different characters in this story. First of all, the traveler, okay? This guy had to have been out of his mind. He had to be an idiot to travel down the Jericho Road all by himself. That was stupid. You didn't do that. That was dumb.
Well, maybe he had an emergency.
Well, maybe he did,
Maybe he didn't have enough money
but it
to
cost
buy a
him.
safety.
I mean, the smart people, they travel together in large groups, even in caravans or in convoys, that kind of thing. Nobody did that on his own. And you could argue that this guy had absolutely nobody to blame but himself for what happened. You might even say, well, dumb nut, it was his own fault. He got what he deserved.
That's real Christian, I think, that statement.
I didn't say I was speaking as a Christian. Then we have the priest. All right, the priest comes along down the road, looks, he sees this bloodied up guy laying there in the rocks, but he just kind of hurries on by.
Was he by himself?
May have been. We're not told, but he definitely could have been.
So he shouldn't have been doing it either
No.
He may have been stupid too. There's no, you know, there are stupid priests. I mean, and here's the reason. After all, this body laying there, he could be dead. And for the priest to touch a dead body would make him unclean for a week. This could cost him his tour of duty in the temple, for which he had been waiting perhaps for years.
He was going to Jericho.
Because, yeah,
For the priest, the importance of ceremony, temple ceremony, the importance of temple liturgy far outweighed the importance of a man's suffering. Along comes a Levite.
Was he by himself?
I'm sure there were stupid Levites.
Looks like more than one like goes by himself down
Could
the road.
even be that the Samaritan is stupid, so don't ask. A Levite comes along and he seems perhaps to have paused long enough to at least look and maybe debate what he should do. Should I stay or should I go? You know? But then, you know what? Bandits were in the habit of using one of their own members as a decoy to lure an unsuspecting travel. I mean, they would, you know, throw ketchup on him and bandage him up and let him lay there. When some unsuspecting traveler went over to help or left the caravan or convoy to go over and help, they pounced on him. They were hiding in the rocks and we pounced on it. So as far as the Levite is concerned, policy, take care of number one first. Safety first. He wasn't about to take a risk. He wasn't about to take a chance just to help somebody else. No way. I'm not going to go down there. Then we have a Samaritan. Understand this. people listening to Jesus tell this story now assumes that the villain has arrived,
Yeah.
the Samaritan. And the reason is that the Jews despised the Samaritans. We know that. They saw them as racially inferior. They saw them as heretics. They saw them as violators of ceremonial law. But guess what? The Samaritan's the hero of the story, not the villain. The Samaritan turns out to be the good neighbor. Now there's two further things that can be said about the Samaritan. First of all, he's apparently recognized as an honest man. I mean, the innkeeper is prepared to trust him. His credit seems to be good. The other thing is it seems that he was the only person prepared to help. Now, was it because of compassion? Was it because of love for fellow man? Was it because of feeling of personal responsibility? I don't know. Anyway, he was motivated, and it led him to act, as opposed to the Orthodox Jews who were focused on dogma and regulations. And so, what are the teachings of this parable for us?
Don't go with the Jericho Road.
Alone. Alone.
Simple enough.
That's lesson number one. When the expert in the law asked Jesus this whole question, Jesus responded by saying, what is written in the law? What do you read? It's a referral to phylacteries. Orthodox Jews wore little leather boxes tied around their wrists called phylacteries. And in that little leather box, they carried certain passages of Scripture. The most common one of all being, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your all strength and might, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. So what Jesus is saying to the guy is, look at the phylactery on your wrist and it'll answer the question for you. I mean, the scribe could also read to love your neighbor as yourself, but in his world of technical interpretations, of technicalities, the word neighbor had to be specifically defined. And they would try to do that at the narrowest definition level possible. See, when you told a Jew your neighbor, it meant your fellow Jew. It didn't apply to anybody who wasn't a Jew. And most especially of all, it sure didn't apply to a Samaritan. So, what Jesus is saying is, first of all, you are expected to help your fellow man, even if he's brought it upon himself. Even if he was stupid and did something stupid, and he deserved it, I don't know. Makes no difference. There's no excuse to look the other way in any case.
That's like the guy standing on the corner that you're not sure whether to hand a $5 bill to.
That's right.
Because
That's right. You say, well, I'm not going to give him $5 because he'll just go to the nearest bar and drink it. Yeah, but what if it wasn't?
I'll go with him.
What if
There you go.
Why did I know that was coming? Yeah, that's a perfect example. The second thing Jesus is saying, any person of any nation, any creed, any race is our neighbor. Every person on the face of the earth is your neighbor. Our offer of help to people has to be as wide as God's love. Oh dear.
we are not God.
No, we are not.
Well, I wouldn't want that responsibility either.
Yeah.
That's the
Glad
model,
I'm not
the
God.
role model that we try to
That's the model we're
aspire
supposed
to.
to live by.
But
That's right.
Brian, if you actually do what you said, that's also called enabling after a certain point.
Yes,
isn't
it would be. So but I'm sure that Jesus, if he, understanding the nature of enabling, would be opposed to that too.
Just checking.
You know,
Okay.
I can't imagine that Jesus would want you to enable a person to remain on drugs or to remain an alcoholic or anything else. And it comes down to the third thing Jesus is saying. The help that you offer has to be practical, realistic, and logical. It doesn't do any good, for example, to simply feel sorry for a person, say, oh, gee, I feel terrible for you, that's just awful, bye. The priest and the Levite may have both felt sorry for the person. They might have. But they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything to help at all. Only the despised, hated, rotten, dirty Samaritan was willing to stop and provide practical help.
Do you think that's why Jesus picked that Samaria
Absolutely.
in the parables to show the Jews?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because, you know, meek and mild Jesus
Yeah.
was in the habit of
think he was-
really
Yeah.
putting it in the face
And that's another way
of
right
the
there.
Pharisees.
Yeah,
I mean, he called them snakes
Yep.
and vipers, hypocrites, and he you know, he was utterly and totally opposed to their way of life. And in the very, very last thing, Jesus says to the expert in the law, who by this time has condemned himself by his own words. The expert in the law says, well, the really good neighbor was the Samaritan. But that same expert in the law would never in his lifetime ever help a Samaritan.
Right.
So he condemns himself by admitting that the Samaritan was the good neighbor. Yeah, really cool. Jesus got him. Jesus then says to him, you go and do the same thing.
I'm not going on the Jericho Road.
No.
You're crazy, dude.
Thank you, Brian.
Furthermore, I'm not going to help anybody that's not a Jew. I won't do it. So anyway, now, next week, we are going to move into a different set of parables, all of which are specifically designed to chastise and criticize the Pharisees and the experts in the law. And I don't know if we'll get through two of them next week or not, but the first one we're going to do comes out of Luke 14, verses 15 through 25. It's the parable of the king's banquet and the guests.
Oh, good, because I've never quite figured that one out.
And a second one that we may or may not get to next week, I don't know, comes from Matthew 21, verses 33 through 46. It is the parable of the vineyard.
Okay, could you say the last one again? It was
You betcha.
Matthew 21.
Matthew 21, verses 33 through 46.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Alrighty.